First, I want to give all praise to Yahweh B'Hashem Yahushai, and double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who are teaching this truth and sincerity. And shout out to Yakim that's out there around the world teaching this truth and risking your lives to do so. And of course, we have confusion of faces, as well as the main tribes of Israel that are blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans who make up the nation of Israel. And so we're prophesying against Esau, the so-called white man, the Edomites, and, he has been made bare in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. So it looks like they're up to their old tricks again, saying Bashar al-Assad, the leader of Syria, is using chemical weapons again. They're trying to dig that shit up because they have no reason to be in Syria, and I'm also going to state, though, that the Turkish invasion, Gomer, they're trying to protect their terrorists, the Free Syrian Army that's in the Kurdish region, and right now it looks like Gomer, aka, is, make no mistake about it, these people have their interests, Gomer, which is known as Turkey, they have their own interests in this, and they're playing both sides. They playing America's side, by letting them use the base to arm the terrorists, because, of course, America helped build the terrorists as well. But then Turkey broke their alliance with America and started going for Russia's side, But make no mistake about it, they're all terrorists. The Turks, Gomer, they're terrorists. Bashar al-Assad has already said that the invasion is an act of war, because Turkey has terrorists they want to protect in the Kurdish region. And of course, like everything else, it's no secret that the Free Syrian Army has been looting Syria from all of its treasures and goods and been profiting for the Rothschilds, which is Gomer. Turkey's main alliance is Zionist state Israel, even though they pretend to oppose them about the Palestine issue. Still, make no mistake about it, the cabal is pretty much the one running thing. And who is the cabal? Goddamn Edomites, the Amalekites, the worst of them all. Because Esau's been cursed from the beginning. And I love how Brother Malcolm brings it out, and, re-edifies and rereads the book. And, things that he read out of that book. Who is Esau Edom? The book that they are making very hard to get, and going to charge a high price for. It begs to ask the question. If you were cursed from God and you knew that you were damned and that your kingdom was going to fall eventually, would you not want to hide your identity? Would you not want to seal who you are? And thus, that's why Paul the Apostle had written that man of sin be revealed, and Esau is being revealed. Every time they try to say that Syria used a chemical weapons attack, they've been exposed for that. Because they have no more narrative. Everybody knows that's a dog and pony show, and that it's bullshit. Just like they said Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and we see how far that went. You see, the cabal is being exposed. And who is the cabal? The Amalekites. Esau, the so-called white man, because he's not white, he's red. And Brother Malcolm, man, he brings that out too, about how they molded into being white people, that they weren't always calling themselves white people, that has to do with white America, like the Eminem song, White America, but still the same goddamn Edomites, They used to call themselves British, they used to call themselves settlers, they used to call themselves, pilgrims, if you will, but they're all terrorists, they're all Edomites, and they've been exposed in every way. So they're going to try to run this false flag thing again. And they're going to get caught, of course, because the whole thing's falling apart. Everybody knows that the real terrorists in Syria is the United States and its allies, which include Turkey. Even though Turkey has broken that alliance, still, Turkey, Gomer, is protecting its assets, its terrorists that America funded. And that's what they're trying to do, so they can keep looting Syria. Most of all, they're looting Syria. And the Rothschilds are profiting big time off of it.
Shalom. All praises, glory, and honor be unto Yahweh B'Hashem Yahushai. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS. all right, who are the true leaders of all Israel on earth today. Salutations to the Akim that are doing this work in truth and sincerity, risking their lives and their freedom to do so. Salutations to the Confusion of Faith brothers who are joined unto our ranks. And salutations to the Akwaf that are listening and learning. Once again, Yahweh Bashem Havashai Brakatah Bashem Rakah Kadash. This is going to be a lesson about the invention of white people. I'm going to give you the history, the facts, the factual history of the time frame and the events which took place and where they took place when the Edomites changed their nationality yet again and became white. Okay? And I'm going to start with, and this information, first let me read a scripture, which is Psalms 64 and 8. And it reads, "So they shall make their own tongue to fall upon themselves. All that see them shall flee away." Okay? So this information, all right, that I'm going to give you, and the books that I'm going to use, are all by Edomites. All right? And it's the Edomite woman. This is how you know the curses is falling upon Esau, Edom, because a lot of information that's coming out as of recently, all right, is the Edomite woman being against the Edomite male, the same way the Judite woman was against the Judite male. All right, the so-called white man, his best ally today is the Negro woman, the so-called Negro woman, because his own woman is turning on him fiercely, man. All right, they're sleeping with Negroes and other men of color. And they're the main ones behind this feminist movement, okay, which is hurting the so-called white man and everything that he does, okay. Yeah, and the curses are just falling on them. The same thing that happened to the Israelites is now starting to happen to the Edomite male. All right, they're losing control over their women, and their women is becoming their biggest enemy, because this information is coming from two Edomite doctors. One being Dr. Jacqueline Badalora, who was the author of the book Birth of the White Nation. So, and she's a doctor, okay? And then, and she was, I know she taught at St. Xavier University here in Illinois. And then the other doctor is the author of White Fragility, the Divide and Conquer strategy, all right, which is Dr. D'Angelo, another Edomite female, okay, and so these doctors are exposing the truth about things that happen, and there was an event that took place in called the Bacon's Rebellion, okay, and it took place in 1676 to 1674. And at this rebellion, what happened was you had men, English men, all right, and Negroes, which is what the record states. And there's been other people who've done the research on these events as well. And all the events that took place up to that, from the 1614 all the way up to 1676, it never said black or white, all right? Negroes have been categorized as Negroes or freedmen, all right, because some of them were freemen who owned property and slaves themselves, and then some of them were slaves, some of them were indentured servants. And the Edomite indentured servants, who Scottish, Irish, or whatever, that's what they were referred to. They were referred to as the land masses where they came from. There was no such thing as white, and I've told you this many and many a times. You could also, there was another guy, another historian named Tim Wise, who've made many speeches on this. He talked about how the so-called white men didn't refer to themselves as white prior to the 1700s, which is true, because when the 1700s came along, that's when white superiority began to flourish around the earth, and this is when all their false pseudoscience and the changing of meaning of words and new speak and all these things that they begin to do to back up and support their newfound thing, this category of white, when the truth of the matter is they're really red. All right. And not red as in ruddy. Ruddy is in the Bible is referring to something that's brownish with red hues, not something pale that blood shows forth through its skin. That's not what this talking about. Okay. But and some of the things that came along with this newfound white superiority was a lot of privileges. Okay, a lot of privileges for white men. Let me pause this. Write them back. Just had to grab my my cup. Because basically it was a divide and conquer thing. All right, because the so-called Negroes, and the natives, who are also referred to as Negroes in Virginia, 1682, Negroes and Native Americans referred to as the same people. They were all referred to as Negroes or called niggers at that point. That happened in Virginia in 1682. That's factual history. Okay, but you had the elites, who were basically Amalek, the fake Jews, mostly, because they owned up mostly everything, even in Britain at that time. All right, they were behind the banks and behind the slave trade and all these things that were going on. Most of the trade businesses and the banks were even owned by them even at this time. That's how they were able to finance the slave trade, which became very, very popular right around the same time as all this began to happen. Okay, but all of a sudden you had these Englishmen and these Irishmen and these Scotsmen and these other Europeans, Germans. Once this category of white came into play, things began to be different, because they got accustomed. All of a sudden, you were in league with the elites because of complexion. All right, so you got to be to the first of the line. You were the first into any place and the first out. You got to actually own firearms and guns. It created this despair with all the natives and the Negroes, because they weren't allowed to own firearms, they weren't allowed to own land, and it also gave the so-called newfound white man the ability to marry, because I think it was something called miscegenation or something to that effect, where you couldn't men of color could not marry white women. All right, and it was supposed to be the other way around, but they never enforced it. When white men would get with these women of color, and it wasn't any problem unless they treated them like a white woman in public, you know. But other than that, there was a lot of privileges that came along. And let me read some of them. It was front of the line privileges, the pick of women sexual privileges, land ownership, jobs, firearms, voting, immunity to conviction of crime against colored people. Okay. This gave patriarchal power to the Edomite male, man. All right. And 100 years later, as the U.S. was formed, and then a lot of these laws that were formed in that time didn't go away until 1952. So that's America for you. And then they get mad about Colin Kaepernick, why he wants to take a knee, or why he did. All right? Because America was set up for the white male. Period, man. Okay? So when this Nathaniel Bacon, who was an Edomite, all right, who will be referred to as poor white trash today, he led this rebellion. And there were Gadites with them, natives, and there were Negroes, and they were armed. And they all worked and were indentured slaves together. And they weren't getting fair treatment from the rich elites, man. So, you know, when this thing finally kicked off, they used that divide and conquer tactic, man. And it instituted, and then in 1681, for the first time, the title of white was used, man. And it's been a negative and dark history ever since, man. Because, like I said, the people, the Europeans that came over, they were referred to as Germans or Scots or English or, Czechoslovakians, wherever it is that they came from. All right. And at this point, too, the forced labor became darker and darker and darker. All right. And then they were able to convince that these people who had rebelled, that, well, the reason why you're poor and you're broke is because of all these darkies. And that wasn't the case. It was the same thing going on today. The 99%ers versus the 1%. All right. The Edomites now are facing the same thing. They're losing their jobs, their wealth, the second class citizenship, which was honored among them. And even though there were levels in that, the middle class is disappearing. And everyone's, and the majority of the people, are all becoming lower middle class, very low middle class, into basically it's just going to be two classes: the elites and the working poor. So the middle class is becoming the working poor, and then then there is no more third class. They're just becoming destitute, homeless, on the verge of being homeless. That is literally, because if you're working poor, that's middle class now. Okay. So it's like yesterday you were British, and now today you're white. And that's pretty much what happened. And that was in 1681. And all this took place on the East Coast, around Virginia. This is when these events took, like I'm giving you this is factual history, man. And so, and then, here's the word I was looking for. I can't say that word. Miscegenation, I believe that it's called. And so that law was put into place, and that law was put into place, but it wasn't enforced when white men, so-called the new race of white men, when they did these things. And you have to remember, Esau Edom has been trying to hide his identity for a very long time. And here we have more Edomite scholars. William Beeson, The Roman Empire of the Edomite, 1853. All right. And I'm just going to read page 9. There are lots of brothers. There's always someone new. So this is very pertinent. I imagine the price of this book is going to go up, just as the book Who is Esau Edom. Like this $16 book, I paid $16 for this book about 11 years ago. This book now goes brand new for about $5 grand, used for about $3,000. And so it's between $3,000 and $5,000 for this book, man. Why? Because of the information of factual history and all the resources and other books that were used to put this together by white, so-called now white men. All right. And as I said, once they were instituted, once the title of white was created, all the pseudoscience that was built around it and the laws that were built around it, America was all built around this newfound whiteness, which created white superiority, which is false pseudoscience and lies, man. And it's come back to bite them, because basically it's ruined the earth, man. It's destroyed the earth. And now at the time when they're being exposed, so we're going to get scriptures to get that. Before that, we're going to read these Edomites who were exposing it, going all the way back to 1853. Okay. Page 9, it says, that the true answer to the question, whence came the Romans, may have been returned and even registered in writing before the birth of Christ. All right. Because, we're constantly telling you that the real Romans were dark complected people. All right. These new Romans, these Edomites had taken over Rome and Greece, going back to Alexander the Greek. That's and the so-called white man, he wouldn't call himself white back then, but they no longer referred to themselves as Edomites anymore. They referred to themselves as Greeks and Romans, and some of them Idumeans, which Idumean is just a Greek way of saying Edom. All right, and the Idumeans were mainly the ones that were referred to, that were the ones who had become Jewish, that Herodian line, and those people who were forced to follow the law, statutes, and commandments under the command of John Hyrcanus, one of the last of the Maccabees, who have subdued cities of Idumeans, of Edomites. All right, and I guess that was part of their surrender. Is like, look, you got to follow our laws. And so now you have a sect of white people who have been referring to themselves as Jewish, you know, even in the time of the Lord. All right. So it says, let me go back to it again. It says, the true answer to the question, which came the Romans, may have been returned and even registered in writing before the birth of Christ, that the response proceeded neither from Greek nor from Roman, but from the despised Jew. That it has been preserved to us in Jewish targums, in their laws, in their records, that exists amidst the fables and impieties and absurdities and the blasphemies of the Jewish Talmud, and that it may be comprehended in 20 words, that the Romans came from Esau, who is Edom, and the Italy is Idumea, Rome, the Basra of the Hebrew prophets, which is promised to be destroyed in the Bible, man. All right. The descendants of Esau, says Jewish rabbins, the sworn enemies and descendants of Jacob, even to the end of the world, were at first a small nation inhabiting Mount Seir, an adjacent country contiguous to the land of Canaan. They were easily confined within their own limits. All right. And that's from Allen's Modern Judaism, London, 1816. So there's yet another one. This Allen's Modern Judaism, London, 1816. That's where this particular information came from. So you got William Beeson and this Allen's guy. Okay. So that Psalm 64. All this information is coming from so-called white men. All right. And white women for that matter. Right. Because Dr. Jacqueline Badalora and Dr. I forget her first name, but D'Angelo, the author of White Fragility, because it is fragile, because it's a lie. Okay? Their history is a lie. Everything about the so-called white man, his whole power structure and his existence is based upon his lies and creating a sense of greatness. All right? This is going to be a huge slap in the face of a lot of you scoffers, like the We As Canes gang. And my favorite scoffer who seems to just love me so much, Max Radozansky. All right? Or Ratansky, or however you say your name. All right? But this is factual information coming straight from them. All right? And I encourage brothers to look this stuff up, man. Dr. D'Angelo, and what she said, this is something that she said was very, it was a very powerful statement. She said, a society that claims race means, is meaningless, but divides itself by color profoundly, and that's the so-called white man. They'll tell you that they divide themselves by color profoundly, but they say that race is meaningless here in America, and that's a lie. Because America was set up for the white male, not the white woman. It was set up for the white man, and that's one of the reasons why these women are coming against them so strongly now. And a lot of white women enjoy the sexual company of men of color, especially the men of the tribes, man. It's just a fact. It's true. Okay? And the so-called white man knows it. That's why, because back in those colonies, when they were first coming over, there weren't that many women, man, Edomite women. I think they said it was about 10 to 1. And a lot of those women were marrying Negroes. And they made punishment really great for those women, too. Because if the white woman married a Negro or a Native American, they inherited because most of the people came over were indentured servants. So that woman's servitude increased by several years. And then her children were also, any children that came from that were made slaves as well, up until, or at least until they were 20 years old, man. All right. And that goes to show you how much the white women, even back then, desired men of color. Okay. Especially when those men of color were given the same opportunity as the so-called white man. All right. Because the so-called white man is weak and feeble and weak in bed in most cases. And you can understand why women don't really choose them. And you just look at professional sports. All right. Almost all professional athletes, the ones of the darker persuasion, have Edomite, wives and girlfriends. It's just a fact. Okay. So let's go now to who was Esau Edom. This book is notorious to the so-called white man. I'm just gonna, and I've read this before, I'm gonna read just a little bit out of these 2 pages. All right, and this also kills the that false love doctrine, man. And the Lord does hate, and He hates the nation of Esau Edom. And now they're exposed, man. And it's the time for Esau to be exposed. And it says, as it is written, this is page 22, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. Romans 9:13. This hatred by God towards Esau is attributed to the human, is an attribute the human heart cannot accept or embrace. Really, the Edomite male. He doesn't want to be, which is why he created a false universe for himself. He created a false identity where he was God. Kind of like in the Black Mirror TV show, The McAllister, season 4, I think episode 2. This man created a false, and that's a perfect example as to he created a world where he was God, where he was desired, where he controlled everyone else's destiny and kept himself in control through fear. All right, and that's pretty much what he did. All right, it says this, and it says this hatred of God towards Esau is attributed, is an attribute that the human heart, the Edomite heart, cannot accept or embrace. Therefore, many will try to explain it away. And this is what they do. Vocab Malone, Dr. James White, Joyce Meyer, these coon sellout so-called Christians. All right. Because Christianity is and especially this newer, even newer form of Christianity, going back to this colonial time, this colonial time when whiteness was created, Christianity was beyond whitewashed. Okay. Thus, scores of theologians have avoided this truth of Scripture and have whitewashed into something more appealing to human nature. God not only hates Esau Edom, the so-called white man, and is against these people, but refers to them as the people of my curse. Isaiah 34:5, one of my favorite scriptures. This curse is not just on Esau, but also to his seed and his brethren. So all of you Edomites worldwide, wherever you are. Okay? And some of you got dark flesh. All this intermingling, you were marrying all those women of color and you made children, man. The child is whatever the father is. So some of those people came out dark and have mixed and mingled. So it's not a color thing. It's a bloodline thing. It's just something that the so-called white man wants to deny and not tell the truth about that. All right. But I have made Esau bare, and I have uncovered his secret places, that he cannot, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is spoiled, and his brethren and his neighbor, and he is no more. That's straight out of King James. If I'm not mistaken, that's Jeremiah, the 49th chapter, which I was actually going to read. So there's no need to read that. All right. Among Esau's brethren were the Amalekites, that's who the fake Jews are today, which were descended from Esau's grandson. And they give you the scriptures of Genesis 36:4-12, which is true. Matter of fact, let's go to that. Okay. Yeah, 6 and 12, actually. It says, Genesis 36:6. And Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all their persons of his house and his cattle and all the beasts and all his substance which he had got in the land of Canaan, and went into the country from the face of his brother Jacob. Down to verse 12. And Timur was a concubine of Eliphaz, Esau's son. All right, proving that you're whoever your father is, because the mother was not an Edomite. Okay, and bare to Eliphaz Amalek, and these were the sons of Adaz, Esau's wife. All right. Okay, this is Exodus 17, and I'm gonna read verse 8, 14, and 16. Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. All right. Verse 14. And Yahweh said unto Moses, Write this for a memorial in a book and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. So Amalek is going to be ultimately destroyed, and all of Esau is. That's what the whole book of Obadiah is about the destruction of the nation of Edom. And in Edom's defense, man, if you were Edomite, you try to cover up and hide that shit too, man. All right? You can't really be angry that they keep trying to say that the Negroes are Hamites and the Israelites and all. They even created a false pseudo doctrine about so-called white Hamitic people. Try to say to the people of Canaan, because they were so racist and during that time period, the pyramids and the relics which were found in the Middle East were so damaging to white superiority. They tried to say that this particular sect of white people were brown skinned. So that goes, but yet at the same time they tell you if you had a drop of dark blood, you were no longer white. Man, Esau's a mess, man. They are broken and defeated, man. You know, they are broken and defeated. Okay, verse Exodus 17 and 16. For he said, because we have Salakia. For he said, because that Yahweh hath sworn that Yahweh will have war with Amalek from generation to generation, man. All right. There is no remedy for the so-called white man, man. Okay. I'm going to jump to page 23 here. And it reads, there is not one favorable or positive statement in the Bible in relation to Esau, Edom. But how does this adverse relationship with God towards Esau, Edom help us to identify who his character is today? To help us answer this, we have to put ourselves in the role which Esau has been assigned in God's script, because that's exactly Yahweh. This is his story. All right, his script. And his script is that Esau would get dominion over the world, rule it viciously, rule it falsely. All right. And through false dealings and murder, rape, robbery, his blessing was the sword. Through the sword, he would take and steal the world and live in the best places. And they have. Then they whitewashed and lied about history. And lied about when they got into power. All right. It reads, if God hated you and your ancestors, how would you react? And what would you do? By natural reaction, you will be against God and his people to prevent them from finding out you are Esau. All right. And this is exactly what they do. The one that God is against, knowing that if God is against something, so will his followers. All right. Hence the reason why the Jews created anti-defamation leagues and all these different things and who identify different hate groups, man. All right. Because telling the truth is hate to them. You call them Esau, Edom, and bring out the factual history. They're referred to that as hate, man. Okay. I'm going to read this. This will be the last scriptures. This is the book of Sirach, 10 verses 8, and it reads, I'm going to read verses 8 and 9. It says, because of unrighteous dealings and injuries and riches got by deceit, the kingdom is translated from one people to another. All right. Jumping down to verse 13. For the pride is the beginning of sin, and he that have it, it shall pour out abomination, and therefore Yahweh brought upon them the strange calamities and overthrew them utterly. Yahweh hath cast down the thrones of the proud, the princes, and set up the meek in their stead. All right. Yahweh hath plucked up the roots of the proud nations and planted the lowly in his place. All right. Yahweh overthrew the countries of the heathen and destroyed them to the foundations of the earth. So that is a prophecy which is about to happen, man. All right. The man of sin has been revealed. All right. Who is Esau, Edom, as pursuant to 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter. All right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the 2nd chapter. And Esau, Edom, you're finished, man. All right. So with that, I hope this was an edifying historical lesson, you know, that giving brothers some ammunition to just go out and further add insult to injury to these pathetic Edomites and watch them, because they are broken and destroyed people, man. And their kingdom is falling. All right. Call halal Yahweh Hashem Shai and Abba Babal.
Meanwhile, the Syrian president has condemned Turkey's military aggression against Kurdish forces in northern Afrin region. Bashar Assad says the operation is part of Ankara's policy that supports terrorist organizations and terrorism in Syria. Meanwhile, the Turkish president has once again pledged to eliminate Kurdish forces in northwestern Syria. Recep Tayyip Erdogan said the army will stay in the Syrian enclave until all Kurdish forces, namely the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PYD, and the YPG, are crushed. YPG forces were warned that they cannot rely on U.S. support to defeat Turkey. Erdogan also criticized some of Turkey's allies for providing YPG forces with thousands of planes and trucks, as well as weapons and ammunition. He stressed that Ankara plans to send 3.5 million Syrian refugees in Turkey back to their country. Well, crossing over to Ohio, joined by Senior Editor of Veterans Today, Gordon Duff. Thanks so much for being with us. Your take on what Turkey is doing and why?
Well, the question of why with Erdogan. In the past 3 years, this is the 6th major change of direction that almost makes people suspect at times that he and Donald Trump might have the same psychiatrist. The primary issue to Damascus is one of their sovereignty being violated. The Kurds are operating with a separate government in that area, have fought in cooperation in the operations to free the city of Aleppo with the Syrian Arab Army, are there largely with the permission of the Damascus government, because they've been fighting terrorists there, terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS that have been openly supported by Turkey. Turkey has no problem supporting terrorist organizations when those terrorist organizations are doing their bidding, or were part of Turkey's failed triumvirate, their secret partnership with Israel and Saudi Arabia, to which Georgia, Azerbaijan, and other nations would occasionally take part. Turkey's been playing a very broad game here, pouring refugees into NATO to blackmail them, threatening to blackmail Syria now with 3.5 million refugees, using refugees as a weapon, bombing civilians. Everybody's doing that, frankly. It's the intermingling of forces makes that impossible. The violation of sovereignty is an issue. The other one, though, is that his plan, his stated plan, is to move eastward. And moving eastward will put him, Manbij is his next target, he says. The Syrian Arab Army has a presence there. And it will put him in direct conflict. It should normally put him in direct conflict with the U.S. as well, because his direction is to go against all U.S.-backed forces that they've used to seize a large swath of northern Syria for whatever reason themselves.
Do you think that Turkey is looking for a permanent presence in that part of Syria?
You know, not necessarily the case. I think Turkey's improved relationship with Iran is an issue. They have an improved financial relationship with Russia. Their relationship with the United States is at a low ebb. They no longer trust the United States. They are breaking some of their ties where it began to look like Erdogan was under the thumb of Israel. I think Erdogan is playing out a domestic drama here right now more than anything else, because his pressures are coming from every direction. And within the next few months, this is going to have to stop. He's going to have to roll this back. The Russians are going to have to step in, because he's part of a peace process where he has to sit at the table with them. And the U.S. is not going to be able to protect Turkey from Russia. And Russia can't stand the humiliation of having nations like Israel or Turkey openly attack Syria while Russia is their stated protector. That would be a humiliation for Vladimir Putin. And that's the last person on earth you want to humiliate.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Gordon Duff, Senior Editor of Veterans Today out of Ohio.
We think you've used chemical weapons, so we're warning you that we may attack, though we have no evidence to prove our allegation. That's essentially how Trump's latest threat towards Syria can be understood. Disregarding America's record on faking WMD evidence in Iraq, it still believes itself to be in a position to pass judgment on such affairs and for others to believe it. Is this a charade to justify long-term U.S. presence in Syria? And is blaming Russia for complicity going to open up a new confrontation with Moscow? Joining us for tonight's discussion is one of our guests, who is the president of the American Institute for Foreign Policy, Mr. Michael Lane, who is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Michael, as always, thanks for joining us here on Press TV. I don't want to use the word comical, Michael, but certainly Mattis's statement about this is comical in the sense that he admits that the United States has no evidence to prove that Syria has used chemical weapons, yet America is concerned, yet America will make a threat to get involved militarily in that regard. What do you make of that?
Well, I certainly don't have any inside information as to what evidence the United States does or does not have or will release or will not release. But I think you have to look at the facts. The Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons has confirmed that there is use of chlorine gas in the Syrian theater. That it's smaller amounts, it's been used multiple times, and you start looking at it and doing the math, and you say, okay, well, the rebels don't really have the technical capabilities or the facilities to reduce this kind of chemical weapon to a warhead like a mortar or a missile shell or something like that, and you look around and it's being used against the rebels. So, you know, simple math tells you, well, Syria is the likely culprit. But I will concede that at this point, the United States has not yet released the evidence that they have that it is Syria. And furthermore, I think that the threats, which were made on background, were relatively mild. They're raising an issue with the Syrian government that if they continue this, at some point they're going to cross a big red line, and the United States will respond in kind.
All right, Michael, I'm glad you mentioned the OPCW.
I didn't mean that in kind. I don't mean chemical weapons.
Right. No, I understood. I'm glad you mentioned the OPCW, Michael, because, you know, the OPCW, Michael, originally, when that first time around, when these accusations of the first alleged chemical weapons used by the Syrian government had come about, even at that time, Russia had said, let's get these investigators onto the ground in those areas where the Americans and others said that these chemical weapons had been used, but they were denied access to those areas. Isn't that interesting? Why not let neutral investigators go into those areas where there has been this alleged chemical weapons use?
Well, absent, you know, a compelling reason that the area or the theater is too dangerous for someone to conduct that kind of forensic work, I'm a strong believer that you ought to have the international organizations in there independently confirming what has been used. And in this case, we do have the OPCW saying that chlorine gas and reports, but unconfirmed, of sarin gas in the same area.
Okay, I just wanted to check if we have our other guest with us right now. We have Martin J., who is joining us live from Beirut. Mm-hmm. He is an award-winning, pardon me, it seems he's not ready yet, but we will, of course, have Martin with us soon. Michael, I'll continue with you for the moment. The U.S., Michael, says that Russia is complicit in this situation because it says, according to the deal that was made in 2013-2014, that Russia has not played by the rules, according to the Americans, has not pressured, quote unquote, the Damascus or Assad government into basically, giving up all of its chemical weapons, to the OPCW, even though the OPCW has confirmed all of those chemical weapons have in fact been taken out of the country. What do you make of that? The bringing in of Russia as being complicit in this situation?
Well, certainly Syria is a client state of Russia's, and they would have some influence to exert. Now, I haven't read the text of the agreement to remove the chemical weapons from Syria in a long time, and I forget whether or not Russia was to put forth best efforts or whether Russia was responsible for restraining Syria or what the story was. I suspect it was probably best efforts because nobody can guarantee 100%. Nonetheless, what we have is use of chemical weapons there. The evidence by right now circumstantial, agreed, is that Syria is using them, and Russia ought to have more influence and more pressure to bear on President Assad to stop him from doing so. There's also some question, I think, at this point as to whether or not these are leftover, hidden chemical weapons that should have been evacuated in 2013, or whether there is some new capability that Syria has developed in terms of manufacturing new weapons. The United States has not spoken to that yet, I don't think.
Okay, Martin is joining us live. Martin Jay is an award-winning journalist who's joining us live from the Lebanese capital. Martin, thanks for joining us. What do you make of this issue, Martin, about the U.S. threatening military action, even though it says at this point it does not, in fact, have any evidence to prove that Syria has used chemical weapons?
I don't think we can take it seriously, not at this stage. I mean, I think a great deal of chest beating is going on at the moment in Washington. I think Trump has really a blank sheet of paper in the Middle East. I mean, the Trump administration is deeply confused at the moment. It's bewildered, it's lost. It doesn't really have an end game in the Middle East, and certainly not in Syria. And I think this idea that that we all need to sit up and take Washington very seriously when it dishes out this inappropriate, anachronistic moral tutelage to the rest of the world about chemical weapons, or we've heard this before, not only with chemical weapons but with nuclear weapons as well. It's the same narrative, it's the same argument that perhaps held water a few years ago but is now really losing credibility on all fronts. I mean, we have to wake up to a few realities. America has lost in Syria. It's out, it's over. It's the most it can do there now is play a proxy role with the Kurds, and we've seen in the last few weeks there's been certain movements about supporting border guards. Some of those individuals are probably taken from extremist groups. These sort of actions that are going on. We know that also that the Kurds have got plans now to are currently clashing with the Turks in a couple of provinces. Erdogan has ambitions of taking a strip along the northern border of Syria. And what can the Americans do at this precise moment except revert back to the same narrative, which really shows them to have a very limited grasp of the situation. It's from the very early days. It was all part of a plan to ostracize and to isolate Assad. They simplified the entire Syria equation from the very, very beginning of Mr. Assad is the main problem, so he has to be removed, and regime change is the only real answer. I don't think we can take these threats very seriously today, to answer your question, and I think we've still got a very long way to go before we can really take the Americans seriously in Syria.
Michael, I wanted to get your thoughts on that because, the acting Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs and Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs a while back said, and I'm quoting him, "The president has committed as a matter of strategy that we will not leave Syria. We're not going to declare victory and go. This is not my opinion. That's the president's strategic judgment." End quote. I wonder, do you think, Michael, that America really is looking for any justification to remain in Syria, to make itself relevant there, to justify that 30,000 strong border force, which news came about a while back as well?
Yeah, well, certainly remaining a military presence in the region increases your influence and increases your ability to react to things. I think the United States has a number of goals. And you know, the Kurds are certainly very, very near the top of the list, having a semi-autonomous opportunity for them in their area of the country. I think that, you know, certainly ensuring that there's not foreign troops that will encroach too close to the Israeli border is one of the objectives. And quite honestly, having a counterbalance to the presence of Iran and Russia in Syria is another of the United States' strategic interests. I don't think we're going to increase at this point the number of troops we have there, but nonetheless, the ones that are there will be working with our partners to ensure that they are as effective and efficient as they possibly can.
All right, so Martin, you know, one thing that gets left out when we talk about chemical weapons or alleged chemical weapons used by the Syrian government is the use of chemical weapons, in fact, by foreign-backed militants, and that's something that's been spoken of a number of times by the Syrian government, alleged by the Syrian government as well, and it's shown evidence to that effect as well through various medias. Why isn't that spoken about more, Martin, if the concern really is just humanitarian, if the concern really is just not using chemical weapons?
Because it doesn't fit in with the narrative that is constantly pumped out by the State Department and by the Pentagon to the journalists in Washington and London. You know, this, as I go back to my original point, that there is this obsession with removing Assad, and anything that can be used to be held against Assad is obviously exemplified, and the details, the evidence on the ground, which can actually support another idea, which possibly might show him in a different light, is conveniently brushed aside. We shouldn't forget that in 2013, when the OPCW sent people out to go ahead with this deal that was brokered and to collect all the chemical weapons, the sarin, that investigation and that deal and how it was implemented, the methodology behind it, from the very beginning was completely skewered and completely unbalanced, and is now forming the basis of a great deal of poor judgment, in my view. At that time, we learnt that a great many opposition groups, many of the extremists, had quantities of sarin gas in one form or another. ISIS had mustard gas as well, and nothing was done about it. There was no investigation into what could be done. It just wasn't part of the agenda, and it's that sort of action which gives UN weapons inspectors and the OPCW a very bad name as being essentially a tool of the West, and I think it's very prevalent today that we still don't have that objectivity, because you know, the opposition groups do have these quantities. Now, your guest alluded to earlier to saying that they were not very sophisticated, and perhaps opposition groups didn't have the ability to put them into mortars and such force. But we don't know that. You know, there's so much we don't know about it, because no one's actually bothered to investigate or even to delve into those areas. So you know, you've got this extraordinary miscalculated and slanted perspective when you talk about chemical weapons, and you have this the hypocrisy, really, of the West is quite breathtaking.
Michael, what do you make of that? Why isn't there an objective look at the use of chemical weapons in Syria? You know, if America says it's wrong for Syria to have done so, the government that is, then why isn't it wrong for the foreign-backed militants to have done so?
Well, you know, we thought we had the chemical weapons issue solved back in 2013 when all sides agreed that the Syrian government would divest itself of the weapons that it had. It was, you know, mostly apparent that it had mostly complied with that. Maybe it fully complied. Maybe it didn't. I don't know, you know, really what the answer to that is. I don't think anybody really knows what. Well, the Syrians would know what the answer to that is. We don't know if the Syrians are developing a new capability with new weapons, chlorine gas in this case, and weaponizing them, putting them into mortars and missile heads and things like that. There's really a lot about this we don't know, and so therefore, I think the reason that the Trump administration held a background briefing and said, look, you know, he's got to stop this now, or he's going to face the consequences, was to really stop it in its incubation stage and not let it get out of hand. Additionally, one final thing, I think the United States is concerned that if these things are developed into small, portable weapon size containers, that they would be ripe for export, and they could wind up in any theaters and even wind up in the United States to be used against us. And President Trump would come down very forcefully if he felt that threat existed.
So, Michael, let me just stick with you. Are you saying that the OPCW should objectively also investigate militants' use of chemical weapons in Syria?
To the extent that there's evidence, I believe they should, yes. If there's a violation of a chemical weapons convention, it ought to be exposed to the sunshine, and people ought to know about it. And if there's folks on the rebel side that are doing that, they ought to be held accountable. It's a violation of international law, no matter who's doing it.
Okay, so what do you make of that, Martin? Because, you know, if we're looking at this objectively again, as you said, there is a skewed view, even in the media, really, about how these things are spoken about. If chemical weapons are a danger, and of course we would all agree that they are, why doesn't America or anybody else involved in this theater in Syria approach that in such an objective fashion?
Well, because I think you mentioned media earlier, but I think media play a very big role in this, you know, and it's very difficult to work in Syria, regardless of which side of the fence you fall. And a big part of this is not setting precedents of objectivity, because if you actually brought in, and if you actually allowed the OPCW to do a thorough investigation into who owns sarin and chlorine, and let's not forget chlorine was not part of the 2013 deal. That was a mistake by the West, so you can't really start pointing the finger at Assad about chlorine if he is using it at all. We don't know, but you know, a lot of this is about disinformation, and we're living and working in really unprecedented times of sloppy journalism and fake news, and the echo chamber, which I've seen and experienced myself so many times in newsrooms, you know, where the same narrative gets repeated and repeated. This is part of this. This is really what I think the Americans are trying to do, is just to keep on repeating this ridiculously skewed and bigoted, ill-informed narrative about chemical weapons, when in fact, if we did have an investigation, if that was rolled out, then people at home, back home in America, simple people, humble people who don't really understand what's going on here, would at least say to themselves, well, something's not right there, because if we're pointing the finger at this guy called Assad for using chemical weapons, but a UN agency of some sort has discovered the extremists have gotten as well, then that would raise really awkward questions for American journalists and American op-ed writers right across the country. And the Washington Post and the New York Times would have to acknowledge that not only have these opposition groups still got a lot of these chemical weapons, but we don't know what they're doing with them, because we don't have any objectivity on the ground. The OPCW's classic stunt is to go into Idlib province like they did in 2013 and use local investigators to talk to local people. Now, that particular town that was attacked in Idlib was held by al-Nusra extremists, and you can't imagine interviewing them and expecting to get an objective answer other than, you know, Assad did this to us, which conveniently fitted exactly with what was expected by those investigators. So you have a total lack of credibility, I think, on the West side, and that needs to change if we're going to expect any sort of cooperation or any intelligent debate or exchange of information on the ground. You know, the Russians have often complained time and time that they are not given a proper hand in these investigations that go on in Syria. And you can't really expect a great deal of cooperation from the Assad government as well, when everything is tipped so dramatically against them.
All right, we have about a minute and a half left. Michael, I wanted to get your final thoughts then, because, this question of America's credibility is an important one, isn't it? Because, we can all look back to Iraq and the fact that, the media fed in live with the government at the time, the U.S. government at the time, in perpetrating and propagating those lies about Iraq having WMDs. We had Colin Powell at the United Nations showing fake, essentially, pictures about, WMDs and trucks, et cetera, et cetera. That whole lie was perpetrated by the entire U.S. establishment. Why should we believe it now?
Well, it was actually the collective judgment of the entire Western establishment that Saddam had those WMDs. He may have indeed had them at some time. We don't know where they went. We know that he did have them because he used them, several years prior to that. So you're right. The credibility of the U.S. is important here, and that's where I think that the background briefing was just that. It wasn't people on the record by name. It wasn't making specific threats. It wasn't naming specific details. It was saying, okay, this is our evidence. This is what we'll do if it continues and if we have the evidence. I don't think that Assad has crossed the red line yet. I think he can cease and desist now. There was a meeting a couple days ago between CIA Director Pompeo and his Russian counterpart, the head of the Russian spy agency. I'm sure that in addition to influence in United States elections, the use of chemical weapons was part of that discussion.
Okay, Martin, I'll give you the last 45 seconds. Go ahead. What do you think about what Michael just said in defense of U.S. credibility?
Well, U.S. credibility, I think, is at stake. But I think there's another question here that we're not looking at, which is this constant, repetitive reproachment towards Russia, as though Russia is a sort of colonial power with Syria, which is somewhat absurd and doesn't really work for the Americans in argument. I mean, Syria is a sovereign state. Assad does not take phone calls every day from the Kremlin and look for guidance about governance or what to do with various weapons or various military units that he has. So I think that is a rather preposterous argument that we should get out of. But of course the journalists are lapping that up. They've followed that lead, and now we have cultivated in Western mainstream media newsrooms this idea that Russia is an omnipotent force in Syria, which it actually isn't. It's a very influential force and a game changer, but we need to straighten those facts out before we move forward.
All right, gentlemen, we'll leave it there at that. But of course, we appreciate both your contributions to tonight's discussion. That was award-winning journalist Martin Jay, who was speaking to us live from Beirut. And we were also joined by the president of the American Institute for Foreign Policy, Mr. Michael Lane, speaking to us live from Washington, D.C. And of course, viewers, we appreciate you joining us as well. Until next time, good night.